To YouTube. I'm starting a channel on election predictions, election forecasts, election discussions, all to do with the US primarily. And the first one I wanted to do was just a wrap up summary about the very recent US presidential election, which has now been declared for President elect Joe Biden. So I'm going to go across all the states, discuss the ones that are more critical in more depth, and I'll start with Washington and go down south and finish in the northeast. So let's get right into it. Washington and Oregon, very safe Democratic states, plus 15-point margins for both states, with most of the vote reporting. No change in there in the last decade at least, and doesn't look likely to change. Possibly some shifts in Oregon, but unlikely within the next decade at least. California, on the same track, even more so, very, very heavily Democratic. It's a 2-to-1 margin in this state. And look at that, 8 million votes, over 8 million for Joe Biden, and the Democrats with 77% of the vote reporting only. There's another 20 plus percent to go, which will add to Joe Biden's actual popular vote margin for the whole country as well. No change likely in that. No nothing crazy expected with this result either. So let's move along to Nevada. So Nevada was a swing state, has been for at least the last 10 years. And prior to that, now is expected to go to the Democrats. It went to the Democrats in 2016 by, I think it was a 2-3 point margin. This time it was expected to go a little more, perhaps, maybe up to a 4-5% margin, just because there was a bit of an undercounting in the polls for Democrats that's been noticed over the last couple of elections from 2016 2018 in this state. So that was perhaps supposed to show Biden at a higher margin, but as of now it's about 2.2. But I do think that will probably increase because only 95% of votes have been reported, and there's still 9% to go in the big Democratic counties, and another 3% there. There is some still to go in the Republican counties, but look at the number of the votes, 389 to 72. There's nothing. That's not going to affect the total. This one's still only 3,000 in White Pine, but yeah, not really going to be a massive difference. It'll likely get more Democratic, so maybe a 3% margin. Still not as quite expected. Now let's move over to Arizona. So Arizona was formerly quite a strong Republican state. In the last 10 years, it has been trending more in the swingier direction. Starting with the 2012 US Senate election, I believe it was around 5% or less for Jeff Flake, which he did the Republican win then. And then in 2018, we all know Kirsten Sinema, actually the Democrat, took that Senate seat around, I think that was 2-point margin. So, of course, it's expected to be a lot more competitive on the presidential level because it's never flipped before. And the Senate seat this time also did actually go Democratic as well. I think it was about 2% again. But yes, now talking about the presidential, it's about a 0.56% margin. It could be possible that Trump catches up, but with the largest county, Maricopa, which accounts for 60% of the vote in the state, I doubt, with 2% remaining, that he's going to be able to overcome a, what is that, almost 19,000 vote margin. There is a few, there's 5% still to report it in that Democratic county, so that just helps Biden. And then it's only 3% reported there, so again helps Biden. 89% here, although the vote totals are lower there. However, the votes that are coming in are the late early votes, so that were mail votes handed in either the day of the election day or the couple days before. I think there's still a few of those left, but it's mostly just provisional, so that could maybe help Trump a bit, but unlikely to make up that 19,000 margin. Looks like Biden will be carrying Arizona for the first time since 1992, I believe. Clinton carried it the first time, that's Bill. And so that is now officially a swing state. In this area, there used to be Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, swing states. Actually, not really Arizona, that's just recently more become a swing state. Now, these states are basically safe blue. If we look at Colorado, 55 to 42, that's a 13-ish point margin. That's likely becoming a safe state. It's not going Republican in the near future. Let's just put that out there. New Mexico, very similar. What's that, an 11% margin? It's not going red anytime soon. Nevada and Arizona will be the main swing states in this southwest area, but this southwest area is becoming very more Democratic. Even with Texas, that we now move to, that actually, on election night, was a bit of a shock. I think a lot of the pundits were saying it was going to be a toss-up, so expected it to be very close, and because we all kind of thought there would be a bit of a Biden wave, or Democratic wave, because of all the commentary on it, we expected Texas to get a little bit more closer. But in saying that, the margin is actually quite close compared to where it's been. It's all about relativity. And 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton carried it by a 9% margin. It is now down to a 6% margin. Oh, excuse me. In 2012, I believe it was upwards of 10%, probably maybe, was it 12 or something like that percent margin. So it's slowly decreasing the Republican margin in this state. And to see that when there was an incumbent first-term president on the ballot in a conservative, supposedly Republican Texas, only win by 6%. I know Donald Trump is unpopular in the suburbs, and everyone, talks about that as a big factor in Texas getting closer, but all in all the Republican voters did turn out in this election. This is not necessarily a Donald Trump problem, it is also a Republican problem. It's maybe a bit of both, but we can't ignore it's a Republican problem. And within the next 10 years, I do believe that it's going to become a true toss-up in the sense that it will be within the 1% either way, like Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona have been this election, simply because the demographic trends, whether that's, more liberal voters moving in from the West Coast, or that's the increase in Hispanic vote, the increase in the suburban vote, that's diverse suburban, white, black, Hispanic, Asian American, moving towards the Democratic Party, away from the Republican Party, and also the increase in urban turnout, just moving away from the Republican Party. Not that the urban vote was ever Republican, but the just increase in that turnout as well because of the huge cities in Texas, Houston, Austin, and I believe San Antonio is the third one, the triangle. Yeah. So that is a big reason why in the next couple of election cycles we'll see Texas get a lot more competitive. So on election night this week, it did seem like there was a kind of lackluster kind of result for the Democrats in this state as to what was expected, but it really isn't. It is showing a trend in their direction, so they should be happy about that. I didn't think Texas would flip this election. I think, in all honesty, it is still a red state at heart at this point, but once those trends kick in even further, and the Hispanic population, which is growing exponentially in Texas, soon to completely overtake the white population, I believe. Once that substantiates and increases even further, there'll be a seismic shift in Texas, especially the Hispanic youth vote. Very important, very important. The youth vote is extremely lopsided for the Democrats and progressives in general, and that really goes up to 40 years old. I'm talking about that 18 to 40-year-old group, and as they begin to get older, within 4 years every time, they will likely increase their voting numbers and therefore increase the Democratic share of the vote in Texas and in other areas, of course, as well. But let's move on. So that's Texas. 6-point margin. It's lean, likely border. Was expected to be probably a little bit closer, maybe a 2 or 3 or somewhere within 1 to 5%. But yeah, so that stayed in Trump's column and will stay in Trump's column. Now let's move over to Florida. So Florida was definitely, I expected it to go for Trump. I did not see any signs of it going for Biden. I know the polls said one thing, but the polls rely on specific sets of data, and I don't always think that's completely reliable. Since they're not taken on the day of the election, the polls are previous days, and people change their minds like crazy, let's be honest. So in the state of Florida, the Hispanic population, the Cuban, South American, i.e. Venezuelan, Nicaraguan population, the migrants and descendants for that group of people not favored heavily. Biden still won the majority, but not a super majority. Trump really dug in and got a lot of that vote. That's different to what happened in Arizona, even different to what really happened in Texas, Georgia. Florida is its own situation. In fact, even the two House districts, 26 and 27, flipped from the Democrats, which they won in 2018, back to the Republicans due to that increase in turnout and increase in Republican vote for, Hispanic South American vote for the Republicans. Now, the margin is 51 to 47, so that's about a 4, or let's say 3 to 4 point margin. That is higher than it's been in any presidential election in a while. I do think Florida is heading in a more Republican direction. I think it is the only swing state out of North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Texas, so the kind of swing south, that is heading in a Republican direction. 2018, Democratic wave year. Democrats did not win anything basically statewide. They should have. 2016, it went for a Donald Trump. Really not worth the Democrats' time to spend any more money here. It is more likely, although Texas's margin was greater, it's more likely that this state is more promising in the future than this state here. I think that's where the Democrats need to focus their energy. Obviously, firstly on North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona, because they actually have either flipped or, it's still too close to call or whatever. But that's Florida for you. Now, North Carolina and Georgia, I just want to say those two, Arizona and Texas, are going to become the swing south. I know that Arizona and Georgia flipped blue this election by very small margins, but that is not to say they're blue yet. They are nowhere near the safe margins of Colorado and New Mexico, which used to be swing states and now are more heading in the safe direction. So these states are the new swing south. So with Georgia, it's actually flipped to Biden. There's going to be a recount, of course, but I highly doubt that recount is going to make up 10,000 votes for Trump. It's now a, 0.2% win for Biden. That's 65,000 to 55. So it's over 10,000 now, and recounts earlier at most would flip 500 votes at very most. So Georgia will flip blue this election. Obviously that's not for certainty. Something crazy could happen in the recount or whatever. But it's looking like it's blue, just like Arizona, which means these two are definitely very swingy in the future, especially Arizona because its Democratic senators flipped as well. Georgia, the special election with Raphael Warnock is looking like it's a possibility for a pickup at the runoff in January. However, the incumbent Perdue will likely pick up the other seats. Ossoff, the Democrat, did come close within 2%, I believe, and had pulled Perdue under the 50, which meant that it has now going to a runoff in January. So those two Senate seats didn't quite flip to the Democrats yet, like Arizona did, but there is a chance one at least will. it's more likely that both won't. It's more likely both will stay Republican because turnout is generally less in special elections, and Republicans generally do well when there's less turnout. Because as you can see, everyone was going on about how Trump expanded his base in this election, but that wasn't necessarily the case. It was just an increase in turnout. The proportion of Biden's base to Trump's base, Trump still has that same proportion and even less this election because he did lose, especially the swing states. With Georgia, the Republican base is still strong. The Democratic base is building up, and during this election was stronger than the Republican base in the presidential election, but not in the Senate elections. The total votes cast, obviously, in the presidential was higher than the Senate's, which means that some, obviously, Democrats, or I should say the total number of votes, some voters obviously didn't vote in the Senate, but in terms of the Republicans, they are more likely to vote for all races because they're generally older, whiter, and more used to the process and aware of what to do, and more informed in the voting and interested in voting itself. So Georgia, it's very swing statey now. Although, it could flip back to Republicans next election if the candidate's right. Whereas Arizona, I'd say that that's still possible, but it's a little bit less. Georgia's probably a toss-up state. Arizona's probably a tilt blue state now, especially because of the senators. We'll see what happens on January 5th, though, and just to mention, those two senators will decide the state of the Senate in the US, whether it will be a Democratic majority or a Republican. If the two seats go to the Democrats, they will then have the majority with Kamala Harris as the vice president breaking the tie. If the Republicans win at least one, they will have the majority by 51 to 49 vote margin. If they win two, obviously 52 to 48, and that will hinder any, Democratic policy agenda. It will have to be a bipartisan policy agenda. But yeah, so let's keep talking about North Carolina. So that hasn't finished counting now because it's ballots postmarked by election day can be received up to November 12th. I believe there's going to be an update next week. It's looking like it will go in Trump's direction. There's a lot of provisional, I believe, and mail-in still to come, but whether they actually do come is the question. Because they were sent out, but not all mail-in ballots are generally always returned. There is a possibility of people, not mailing it in and deciding to turn up on election day, or just, not wanting to do it, or not remembering, whatever. But that looking like it is staying in Trump's column. However, it is very close, within 1.4%. A full-on swing state for the future. Democrats need to really target this, especially the big cities and suburbs, as I've said for Arizona and Georgia, Atlanta, massive metro area, literally turn the state blue. So in North Carolina, the Democrats need to, and the third real swing state, besides Texas, obviously, to almost flip blue, and they need to concentrate on this. The margin in 2016 was a 3-ish point margin, and now it's only a 1.4. So you can see where that trend kind of leads, and you can see that these two states are really going to become targets of the future, and they're going to become, almost could, if it keeps going in the Democratic direction, become the new kind of blue wall of the South, but we'll have to wait and see. Virginia become basically a safe Democratic state now. I mean, 10 points. 10 years ago, 2008, 12 years ago, was considered a swing state. It's become safe like Colorado and New Mexico. Now, not much else to say about that. The Senate was also a safe margin for the Democrat. These are all safe states. So Maryland, Delaware. I'll just go over these conservative kind of red inland states. So Mississippi, safe. Alabama, safe. large black population in Mississippi, sometimes it gets closer when there's higher turnout, but in this case, the white conservative vote definitely turned out for Trump. Louisiana, similar thing. They have the New Orleans area, but that's not enough to overpower the rest of the state, obviously. Kansas, similar. Missouri used to be somewhat of a swing state. 2008 was very close, but not anymore. Definitely safe Republican. Oklahoma, safe Republican till the end of time. Kansas, there was a few polls prior saying it was going to get into a likely margin, but no. Trump really turned out his base. He did for the whole election, really, but like everyone says about how he expanded his base, that's not exactly accurate. Biden still got more votes than him. The majority. His base is still the minority when you look at it proportionally. And that's what you have to do because you can't compare numbers in different elections because there's different turnout of the electorate. Wyoming, ridiculously Republican. Utah, similar. Idaho, similar. Not really much to discuss about these states. North and South Dakota, similar. Montana was supposed to be a bit closer, especially because I had a closerly anticipated, I guess, House and Senate election with the now former governor running. However, it's still very red, very conservative. Not as independent as it used to be, I would say now, to be honest. Iowa used to be a swing state, no longer a swing state. Look at that, almost a 10-point margin. This is now a Republican state. They should have lost the governor's race in 2018. It was a Democratic wave year. They didn't. This year, the Senate race was a potential pickup. Did not come close. Biden really did not come close. Even the Democrats lost a congressional district. It's really trending in the Republican direction, and that is because there is a great white population in the state, and there's not really any diversity. There's no massive cities. There's Des Moines, but I mean, it's not really comparable to Houston or Phoenix or Atlanta. A lot of rural area, obviously, as well, and that's very conservative, become more Republican. With Illinois, safe Democratic state, 13 points, still 10% to count. In Illinois, the Chicago area really dominates the state. There's no chance of this, going Republican, although it's, in the Midwest, and there's a lot of swingy states around here. Iowa, safe Republican now, to be honest. Illinois, obviously safe Democratic. Indiana, safe Republican. It used to be somewhat of a swing state, went for Obama in 2008, but not likely anymore. Look at that 17-point margin. Democrats also did not pick up any congressional seats in this state. Kentucky, safe Republican. Look at that, 46, 56, 60. It's almost a 25. What is that? 25, 26-point margin, something like that. Ridiculous. Tennessee is safe. West Virginia, very safe as well. Ohio used to be a swing state, no longer a swing state. It's now a likely, if not safe, Republican, to be honest. Well, I mean, 8 points. Okay, let's say it's a highly likely Republican state. For 60 years has gone, excuse me for that, for 60 years has gone with the presidential winner, no longer. Ohio and Florida are no longer bellwethers. Especially Ohio, it's broken its bellwether streak now. It's become a more conservative state. Big rural areas. There are some big cities, but the rural and suburban vote is a lot more conservative than the country and the new southern suburban vote in general. So yeah, it's becoming a very likely Republican state now. Would not really look at that as a toss-up state anymore, to be honest, although it is still in a likely margin, so it's always possible when they do have this Senator Sherrod Brown, who's a Democrat and wins generally by likely margins, like in 2018. So now let's talk about Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. So these three were the key to Biden's victory. He rebuilt the blue wall by smaller margins than anticipated. Michigan still did go by the highest out of the three, which was expected. A 2.6% margin, so a lean margin, was probably expected to be about 6 or 7%. But there is one thing I want to say about this. Biden Biden, the Democratic nominee, was running against an incumbent Republican president, and people naturally vote for the incumbent by large margins. To beat an incumbent president is incredibly hard. It's only been done by, I think, 3 people in like somewhat like the last 50 years. Once was Bill Clinton, in I think it was 92. George Bush, the first one he beat, but that was what, like 10, 20, almost 30 years ago. So it doesn't happen often. People, especially in years where there is a crisis of some kind, and this one was a health crisis with the COVID-19 pandemic, the incumbent president is generally re-elected. Trump had to really screw up, to be frank, to lose. And that's why I think the margins are much more closer than the pollsters anticipated. With Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan, however, they are swing states. They are the new real swing states. But the thing is, they never have been that blue. They were likely for Obama, but that was a rare case. Even before that, with Kerry and Gore, they were always very close. Obama delivered a kind of once-in-a-generation coalition that really just, with the whole recession that year, it's the economy stupid. There's a lot of job loss, and there was no end in sight. And that the economy always flips the voters, and there was no incumbent president. So that kind of made them appear in a pseudo-safe kind of way. But they're not. There have always been swing states because there's large rural white populations against large diverse cities. So it always, gets quite close. And obviously the union working class has kind of, over the years, gone closer and closer to the Republicans. Although that's a bit of an antithesis to what the Republicans stand for, but the thing is that they now are very definitely confirmed swing states. However, they do lean Democratic. That's the important thing to note. There is more Democrats than Republicans in these states, and that is, that's why the Blue Wall was rebuilt. 2016 was somewhat of an anomaly, with them flipping red. It wasn't a trend. They're not going to stay red forever now. Just as Arizona and Georgia and North Carolina, Georgia and Arizona are not going to stay blue forever. And by forever, I mean in the next, 2 or 3 elections. These are actually heading, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, in a more Republican direction. So is Minnesota. Minnesota, however, is still likely for the Democrats. It's a more Democratic state than these 3. It just happens to be that way. It's not as Democratic as Illinois, obviously. But yeah, so these 4, I would say, heading in a more Republican direction, although they still lean Democratic and they still tend to vote Democratic. Whereas Arizona, Georgia now are leaning in a Democratic instead of Republican direction, and they vote Democratic as well. So this is a kind of good forecast for the future for the Democrats. They have a lot more opportunities and possibilities of where to pick up states. However, saying that, they have lost Iowa and Ohio and possibly Florida. So this is, the natural balance of things, picking new states where they're kind of more favored in. So things do balance out, but I'm just saying that the South is, in the long run, in the long term, next 20 years, going more Democratic. The Midwest is going more Republican. We'll see how quickly those changes come into effect, and whether that actually, ends up really lopsiding the, country to one party or the other. If I was to guess, I would probably say it'd be to the Democrats, because while the Democrats still maintain, slight advantages in the Midwest, which doesn't quite look like it's changing anytime soon, because the cities are still huge. Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. These states are also moving in the Democratic direction. So there could be, perhaps with the right candidate, of course, a blowout landslide in the near future, similar to Obama, especially when this one goes. But very, not anytime soon. With Wisconsin, it's a point seven. Sorry, is that 0.7, 0.6-ish point margin. Near what Donald Trump got in 2016. But we must remember that, it's against an incumbent president, so it's never going to be a blowout. Michigan, a little bit more, as I said. Pennsylvania, just above 0.5, which is the recount margin. I do believe Wisconsin's within 1% recount. Therefore, that will probably go to a recount. Pennsylvania, probably not. Biden's lead is increasing in Pennsylvania with still some mail-in ballots to come from the big Democratic counties around Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Pennsylvania, it looks like the predictions were quite off. They were supposed to be, 4 or 5%, and this was, 0.5%. But again, it's the incumbency. Hats off to Biden for actually winning this state. I think it is still going to be one of the massive concentrators on future elections as that turning point state. These ones: Delaware, New Jersey, safe, very safe Democratic. New York, extremely safe Democratic. Still 16% to count, so we'll add to the popular vote for Biden. Connecticut, very safe Democratic. Don't see these states, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, going Republican anytime soon. Vermont, same thing. New Hampshire is different. However, this is now likely Democratic. As Ohio and Iowa have moved more Republican, wouldn't quite say safe because it's not quite a 15-point margin, and Ohio's, even closer. Likely Republican. New Hampshire, which used to be a toss-up only 10 years ago, is now a likely Democratic state. It's not safe, though. The Senate race, however, with Shaheen, I believe her name is was safe. Went by a very large, almost 15% margin, I believe. So yeah. With Maine, that's generally been a likely, except Trump bought it within 3 points last time. Now, obviously, it's gone back to its roots, which are Democratic. It's a 10% between likely and safe margin. The second district, however, did flip for Trump by a likely margin, 7%, I believe. However, it still did the second House district, still went to Jared Golden by a lean margin. So there was a bit of, splitting the vote ticket there between the Mainers and the second district. Susan Collins also did win Maine by a likely margin, I believe, which is interesting because Biden won it by a higher likely margin as well. I believe that is all the states we have discussed. Hawaii, very safe Democratic, just to end, and Alaska will be safe Republican. It was anticipated to be closer, but no, not going to happen. I think that's everything. I've discussed all states, yes, and concentrated on the important ones. So yeah, leave a like, leave a comment. What do you think? Do you agree with my statements? Do you not agree? And I will see you in the next video when I decide what that is going to be. Thanks for watching.